exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
And other things.
Here with operative alchemist, wild crafter, farmer, clinical herbalist, and educator Daniel Wiseman. Daniel, how are you? How's life? What's going on? What's new in the garden these days?
Life is good, despite the crazy times we're living in. Things are interesting and staying really busy. Working a lot more in the lab than in the gardens this year, which is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I'm missing outside a little bit, but I'm also just, head over heels in love with being in the lab all the time and working diligently away at things there. So that's been great.
Yeah, for sure. I saw you were doing something with, I think it was called benzoin. What is that? Is that some kind of like tree or something?
Yeah, benzoin is a resin. We touched on it a little bit as an example in the last time we spoke, speaking about volatile salts. It has a very readily sublimated salt in it, which smells divine, smells like vanilla and kind of sweet like honey, but very, very readily sublimated and beautiful. These very light, feathery needles grow when you apply heat to it into a proper vessel. So yeah, it's been used as like an incense and a key ingredient in perfumery. It's really good at stabilizing and preserving things.
Wow, that's really cool. So this podcast may be a little overdue, but it was inspired by your recent message you kind of put out. And so I figured this would be cool to just do a little episode on this. It's in regards to life in general, the alchemical arts and medicine in general, this kind of simple and essential notion of to do no harm, or maybe you can help me pronounce it in its powerful Latin form. What was it? It was primum nocere?
Yeah, and I'm certainly no expert in Latin, but yeah, primum nocere just means to first do no harm. So it's kind of it's a first step, I think, that you should take in working in the healing arts. It's actually it's something from the Hippocratic Oath, but like a relatively new version of it. I think it wasn't entered into it until about the 17th century, but the essence of it was in the original Hippocratic Oath, to first do no harm.
Yes. And especially, when producing any product for consumption, promoting products and or teaching methods for others to learn from in their pursuit to create their own offerings, that are to be intended to be utilized in a medicinal or healing way. And I'm so happy to be able to facilitate this communication for anyone out there who is learning just like myself, because most of us just want to learn so we can go out and hone our skills properly and use the knowledge that we get from more advanced individuals and direct it positively to create good quality works. And for those that, have been following this podcast since the beginning, I've been able, they've been able to see my journey evolve in real time. And I think, often when we're first learning about anything, it's very easy for us to kind of fall prey, to seemingly authoritative figures or representatives, so to speak, of any given sector of inquiry. And we may definitely find ourselves more easily intoxicated by individuals, perhaps because, we don't know any differently. And it could potentially lead to subconsciously adopting errors in our personal approach. So I think we should always hesitate to be, and be cautious in investing our trust fully until we've seen kind of like a consistency demonstrated, and, a more solid track record of some kind that kind of speaks for itself in regards to the works produced and the validity of the claims made, whether that be something like the oil of gold or, whatever. So anyway, I think it's kind of the inevitable nature of things that there will be people, out there creating glorified substances that in reality don't exactly remain integral when examined by the light of truth. But I think that as long as we remain in a beautiful, state of openness to learning always, collectively, we can all work together and kindly communicate, ask questions, and happily assist each other, or, lift each other up if we have the experience and ability, which is why you yourself, and many others are such a blessing, because you're very willing to, share your information and help guide people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an incredible part of our opportunity right now in modern times, is that it's so easy for us to share with each other because of the ease of communication through the internet, like social media, ease of travel around the world. I mean, this is something that's unprecedented in, in alchemical history, or history of healing arts, or just history period. It's so easy for us to share with one another, and as they say, many hands make light work. You could think of this a double meaning if you want to. So it's, it really inspires me, and and I want to say too, like in talking about risks, I don't want this to be something that's puts a negative light on anybody or any aspect of what we're talking about. I really want it to be a positive springboard for people to just take a step back and ask questions, check themselves, check their sources, and be sure, because that's that difficult question that often leads to the largest amount of growth in yourself and in your work or in your understanding. So I think these are great opportunities to just continue to grow together that way.
Definitely. So what you're trying to say is check yourself before you wreck yourself.
That is exactly it.
So what are some mistakes that you kind of often see, maybe just some common ones, or some things that you kind of find yourself a little bit weary of in general, in terms of, things that you might come across, and you might kind of want to steer people in the right direction in regards to things of that nature?
Well, there's a lot of things, I suppose. So before we get into the specifics of like maybe different preparations or different kingdoms of the alchemical work, like there's some basic tenets that I find that really help me stay on track. And maybe I should mention those first. Like I find to try to stay humble always, especially in the pursuit of truth through alchemy, like to not get lost in the in how grandiose it is, and maybe end up making yourself more of a personality than somebody just representing the work. Being humble, thanking the people that that helped you on your own path. Like for me, like I'll say it every time I speak, like Robert Bartlett has been the most incredible teacher for me on this alchemical path. And I think he does such a great service of being just totally ego free, humble, just gentle but genius at the same time, and willing to also explore this in a modern way, and not just be stuck in like a dogmatic past view of alchemy. Like, he's done so much work in describing the chemistry of it, and in that finding a lot of safety in very potentially risky ways of preparing alchemical medicines. John Reed is another person that I really look up to, another living teacher of mine who incredible brilliance and incredible attitude, just being so gentle but genius, and just being humble, and not making it about himself, making it about the work. And my lab partner and really good friend Roger Lambert, we're stumbling through this together, and it's such a great person to have support me, and he's always willing to be wrong and make changes, and commit to higher standards, commit to research. And these are things that I think we should all do. When you kind of if you're humble, you tend not to get out of line and get lost in the weeds of the excitement of it all, or the shininess of alchemy. Intentions are huge. You have to really, when you're talking about making medicines or getting into healing arts, even if it's just for yourself, really want to set your intention on, like, what are you seeking out to do? Like, are you there to help? You're just trying to evolve yourself and therefore help others around you by reaching on higher levels of your own potential, or are you wishing to share your healing whatever preparations or skills with the public, and is it that way that you're trying to help with this, or of course you can get stuck in the glamour of it and see that like money is a thing, business is a thing, and I think there's a delicate and there is a healthy balance that you can have with that, keeping yourself afloat while staying true to your inner heart set intentions about things. But there's a very important thing to always check yourself on, like, why are you doing this? What comes first in your priority of intentions. Dogma is a thing, I think, which is huge in alchemy, because I think it's very beautiful the way that the tradition of alchemy has been described throughout the ages. It's poetic, it's allegorical, it's symbolic, and I think oftentimes, just like with religion, we want to kind of glorify those who have walked before us and imagine them as like perfect masters of the truth, or perfect texts, like we look at some religious texts. But in the end, I don't really see perfect examples of, these are all human beings and they're texts written by humans, and as incredible as many of these people were and many of these texts are, they're not perfect, and I think we should always question everything, and question everybody, question ourselves, and doing these simple things, I think, really helps keep you in line and will keep you away from the riskier things. So yeah, those are some of the things I wanted to preface with before we really dive in. But if you'd like, we can jump right into the heavy stuff and talk about metals if you feel like it. How does that sound?
That sounds good. I want to ask one question before we jump into it. You mentioned a name that seems to be popping up in my reality lately. You said John Reed. Was it John Reed the second, or something? Because I keep hearing this. I think Phoenix might have mentioned it to me. But yeah, tell me a little bit about John.
Yeah, John, I believe, is one of the heaviest hitters in the modern alchemical scene. And you haven't heard about him probably because he's so humble, And I mean, it's just like Robert. Like, if Robert didn't have his wife Karen to kind of sing his praises from the top of the mountain, like, a lot of people probably wouldn't know about Robert either. People like Robert and John, they're committed to the work. they're committed to their close students. They're not trying to be famous. It's not about a personality, it's about the work, it's about the truth. Working consciously with nature and moving towards truth, moving towards higher aspects of ourselves. And that's why a lot of people don't know about John, but he has some incredible literature online, all for free. He's got a book that's just online for free. And I recommend anybody to just Google search John Reed and alchemy, and you're going to find him. And you're going to find a treasure trove of information about spagyrics and alchemy as a whole.
Wow, that's awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we put that out for people. That'd be probably a great resource for them. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it in regards to metallics.
Yeah, I think it's an important place to kick off on, because I think it holds the risk of potentially a lot of harm, and it's harm that's been done. That's the other thing I should say, like historically, and I would say in modern times continuing to be, that there is harm done by the improper handling of this subject. I mean, alchemy is famous for poisoning, and I don't think that it stopped in times, and that's why I felt called to speak on some things. Not to, again, I don't want to push anybody away from the subject. I'm not looking to put any individual down. I'm never going to name names or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about just risk. And when you see something being done which could potentially be harmful, or is harmful, I think it's wrong to not say something. To let evil go unchecked is to do evil oneself. And I don't mean that anybody's intentionally trying to be evil, because I think most people, even when they're wrong, have the best intentions. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So yeah, metals. There's many things that I've seen, in particularly since alchemy has been really blown up in social media, Instagram in particular, where all of a sudden there's these glamorous products and personalities and claims that really pull people in, like alchemy has always pulled people in. It's an amazing subject. It's very magnetic. But with the metals, I think that there's been some really poor information popularized. And from that, like even from a single source, sometimes so many people can be led astray by trusting a source, everybody with good intentions, but it can really go the wrong way. So a main thing that I was talking about in this last post that you referenced was, it's basically part of what's called the wet path, which is using particular solvents, essentially, so wet, liquid, extractive measures to work with metals. What I've been seeing commonly from many different sources is this idea of philosophical dissolution of different types of metals. So philosophical dissolution is the concept that you can dissolve a prepared metal in a way that it is converted into a safe to use oil rather than a metal, and that it is unable to be returned back to its original state. So it's not just dissolved, because you can dissolve a metal into a solution and then return it back to a metal. The idea of philosophical dissolution, at least in a chemical sense, is that it has changed from a metal to an oil, a sulfur, these metallic oils people talk about, and that it can't be returned back, and that the form that it's been turned into is safe and therapeutic. Philosophically, this is talking about a transmutation where it's turned from potentially like a toxic metal into a healing oil. So something's changed inherently about it. So something that I've seen a lot of is, well, just maybe some misunderstanding and maybe some incomplete processes, particularly with chloride salts of metals, turning different prepared metals. They could be oxides, maybe acetates. There's different forms of metals you can use, but dissolving them essentially into hydrochloric acid, making chloride salts of these acids, and then basically extracting them with what people call metallic spirits, which oftentimes is, chemically speaking, is acetone, or predominantly acetone, depending on your source. And what really stuck out to me is that although I'm not going to go through exactly step by step how to do all these things, so I don't really want to put it out there exactly like that, but gold is worked with in this way, and it certainly works when done properly. But there are many other metals that actually, when are, as chloride salts, are readily soluble in solvents such as acetone. And often after the metallic oils are extracted, so to speak, it's not necessarily extraction. A lot of it is actually catalyzed oils. There's something created from the process, not actually from the metals, but usually the acetone is removed, and then the final product is dissolved into alcohol in a process often referred to as sweetening, which is, mixing it into alcohol for potability, but also too, there's an aspect of sweetening that is all about cleansing these products of potential toxins. So I think there's some misunderstanding of what you can do with different metals in order to retrieve a truly therapeutic and safe to consume oil. These common metals used, like tin and iron and copper, for instance, representing, Mars and Venus and Jupiter, these classic alchemical metals and planets. These are all completely soluble in acetone and completely soluble in ethanol, alcohol, as chloride salts. So, essentially, like as is, there's no way to just completely precipitate these metals out and remove them so you have a heavy metal free oil. There's a lot more work to be done, and many different paths of springing forth from this chloride path in order to actually achieve safe to use oils. So I've seen quite a bit of it. I could probably think of a dozen examples, and again, I'm not here to name names, but I've seen many examples of this go on, and specifically on Instagram. And to me, it's very worrisome, because I know people are selling these things, and I know people are consuming these things, and realistically, these would be containing very toxic metals.
For sure. Yeah. So I guess the sweetening process is definitely something that seems to be an important aspect. And then is there something with the maturation as well that kind of plays a big role into the quality of the outcome as well?
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because there's two aspects of this time factor I think we should talk about. And one is certainly in the sweetening, which is many different metallic processes. It doesn't have to be the one I just mentioned, but many of them, like not only do the oils produced in the metallic path take time to be produced, is oftentimes, again, they're catalyzed. It's created in the process rather than extracted from a metal. As metals don't have oils in them, they have the ability to produce them. So there's that. And so it's a matter of quality in one sense. And in the sense of safety, many different pathways to metallic oils require a long time for certain precipitates to fall out, which often are, heavy metals, in order to remove them properly. And there's many other steps of properly removing them as well, in the pathway to get there. And even afterwards, there's many steps that can be taken, for further separation of pure from the impure, this whole alchemical art. The other thing about time, and I think we can really, something that has really bothered me in seeing it, is this rush. There's a rush to the metallic kingdom, without having the proper training or understanding, or, really setting in well-guided intentions of what it is you're seeking out to do by making these things and making them available. I'm seeing a lot of people working with lab grade, commercial solvents, which, when we're talking about catalyzing oils, there's a philosophical truth to this, where it's just you're not doing the work, the heavy lifting, which is producing living menstruums through quite a bit of labor, producing philosophical menstruums, this whole metallic spirit, like acetone from the hardware store or from a lab supplier is not the acetone or the metallic spirit being spoken of in alchemical texts. It's not chemically the same, although there may be a predominance of acetone. There's just so many other things that come with the natural production of these solvents, which are so inherently important to the process of creating truly alchemical or therapeutic medicines. I think it really comes down to chemistry. A lot of this work is the longest aspect of the work. It's the most laborious aspect of some of these preparations, is just creating the menstruums that you need for something like the wet path. Hydrochloric acid is, and there's even older texts that mention this, when a solvent is dead, and it's stripped of its life force, meaning it probably doesn't have any traces of the sulfur principle of whatever it came from, which often is the case with living menstruums. That's what you have. You have a little bit of the soul, a little bit of the life. If you cautiously distill wine to make an alcohol, the way that it's instructed to in most alchemical texts or spagyric texts, you get a little bit of that sulfur with it. You have the soul of the grape. It's that universal alcohol is imbibed by the life force of grape and its oils. Or if you prepare, the king's bath, hydrochloric acid, by collecting potassium nitrate from a bat cave and pissing on a compost pile for a year to extract your own sal ammoniac, and dry distilling these things together to create hydrochloric acid and other active compounds too, or solvents and sulfurs as well. These are chemically different than commercial preparations, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of skill building, which I think is necessary to build in order to properly do the end phase, which is cleaning the metallic oils, sweetening the metallic oils. There's all these things that you miss if you don't do this, and I'm seeing essentially everybody that there's just not a lot of people that are doing the work. I don't really know of, people other than, people like Robert Bartlett, or I've seen a few people working with urine, which is great to see. I've seen a few people creating truly, philosophical metallic spirits like acetone, but the hydrochloric acid bit, I haven't seen one picture of anybody doing that, and maybe they haven't, show us, please. It's an incredible thing. Show us you in the bat cave collecting the potassium nitrate, or pulling it out of the air from the atmosphere, or, creating, pulling your own sal ammoniac from your urine. These are amazing things to pull together. And I think speaks a lot to how much skill building is involved in just the preparatory steps of properly addressing the metals. I'm not seeing that work done, and it's said that when, a solvent is completely stripped of its life, that being dead, it takes life away rather than gives it. and that's a really important philosophical concept in a lot of this metallic work, is that these philosophical menstruums are giving life back to a preparation. And I think chemically speaking, I think that this is highlighting that there are oils and other solvents that are important to be there, that facilitate a proper like catalyst or catalytic reaction that creates these therapeutic metallic oils. So this is a big factor of time and willingness to really learn how to do this the right way and take the time to do it, take the time to master it, take the time to build all the skills needed to do this safely and efficiently and in a way that creates medicines and not poisons or quick ways to kind of cheat the system or seemingly cheat the system and make things in a matter of days rather than years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's like that saying, great things take time. So, and I've heard of the acetate path. Is that what is being referred to in terms of using acetone? And then is there common errors in texts that one would find that speak of the acetate path? I don't know. I've seen some texts online. I haven't read them, but I'm wondering if that actually alludes to the actual alchemical acetone or if that's speaking to the more chemical-based acetone.
Yeah, so the acetate path is definitely a path which can produce metallic spirits, often which are predominantly comprised of acetone. The original way of industrially producing acetone was through destructive distillation, also known as dry distillation or pyrolysis of acetate salts in order to produce acetone. So this path definitely does produce these metallic spirits, and this is something that I do see people doing, which is great, and I love to see that because it is a lot of work to prepare the prima materia, the stuff you need to begin the process and to do the process itself and to clean it up, and the yield is very low for anybody who's done it. They could see you need a lot of acetate salt to make very, very little metallic spirit, whereas you can go buy like a liter or two for $5 or $10 at the store. I see the allure to the commercial solvents, and and they could be helpful for learning things too. It's not like I'm completely against them, but the acetate path is generally referring to pyrolysis, which is dry distillation or destructive distillation, breaking things down by heat alone. So you're having like a solid dry substance, an acetate salt, being subjected to different degrees of heat in order to separate the elements. Oftentimes it's the 4 elements that people are drawing out with the acetate path work rather than the tria prima, well known in spagyrics. It's the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water are drawn out and then reconstituted, brought back together as a complete medicine. Or sometimes people just use the oil, sometimes people just use the spirit taken off, which is the acetone predominant spirit. Often, it's not always, it depends what metal you're working with. But this is a great subject too, in itself, because there's a lot of questions about, what is produced with the acetate path. Like, is this a path that produces safe to ingest metallic oils? I think that's a big question, because the thing is that even when really well done, the end products of these processes are extremely complex. It's not just like there's 1 or 2 things in it. And even beyond, let's say you do a really great job of the acetate path or any other path, and you end up with this metallic oil, even if it doesn't have metallic salts in it, it doesn't mean that it's safe. And even if it, wasn't harmful, it doesn't mean that it's therapeutic either. There's big question marks on these things. It's an area that really deserves research, which is why I love Robert Bartlett's approach to this, because he's been heavily researching all of this for his entire path of doing this work, and although, I think there's a place for exploring the therapeutic value of these things, and a person can take on whatever amount of responsibility they want to in sharing this or taking it themselves, but there are a lot of question marks here, many, many, many more question marks than answers, as far as what are we creating, is it safe, and is it therapeutic? Some would argue with the acetate path that its value is actually just to make the metallic spirits, which can then be used in the wet path of doing philosophical dissolution and creating metallic oils that way. And I think that we're maybe a little bit closer to the truth of that, in the sense that the metallic spirits produced by it, and combining that with the wet path, a lot of people have had a lot of success with that, and I haven't heard too many horror stories when it's done properly. So that's an argument that can be made by some people. I'm not going to say which side I fall on, because I don't have a side here. Whether is this just a way to produce proper metallic spirits, or is it also a great way to produce metallic oils themselves? But we definitely know anytime we burn something completely, that there are a lot of toxic products produced in smoke, which is essentially what you're catching in dry distillation. You are trying your best to slow down and cool, something that's essentially going to be burning at a point, collecting this distillate of something breaking down by heat, and then separating it further, cleansing all the different fractions that you distill off, and hopefully arriving at a clean product, and successful marriage of them in order to create an oil or a tincture. But there's a lot of questions here, and there are many, many, many red flags, many places where toxins can be created, heavy metals, or just carcinogenic substances in general, or things that we just shouldn't put into our bodies. So lots of questions, more so than answers.
Definitely. Yeah, I've got lots of questions. So I'm wondering, my question, what's the created constituents or compounds that occur that in the end result represent the oil of sulfur or the oil of a metal?
Well, that's just the question, right? I think for the most part, we don't know. I think Robert, for me, and I'm sure he's not the only one, he's my go-to source, because he's done decades of work in analyzing these substances. And I think he's put a lot of light onto this, teaching worldwide and sharing this with everybody so willingly. But what we don't know a lot about these substances, other than his books and his lab notes of publishing some, many, many different types of analytical tests on these oils. We really don't have a lot of information to go by. And even when we do have that information, let's say information from Robert, beyond, like, let's say, Robert's done a great job of making an oil of a metal, gold or antimony or whatever, again, like I mentioned it earlier, if it's free from metallic salts and it's free from excess acidity or excess alkali, we can rule out some aspects of risk, but in the end, like, we have a huge complexity of chemical constituents, many of which have never been studied as far as their therapeutic principles go. Some of them, we could find commonalities for sure. And I think what is often spoken about in this world is this comparison to what happens in the plant kingdom. And I think this is a truth, and it's a beautiful truth too, where plants are doing this process of making oils from metals. Plants are drawing up metals and minerals from the earth, and in their own alchemical process of their own endogenous menstrua that they contain, different spirits that are inside the plant, the combination of endogenous spirits in plants, along with metals and minerals that they draw up, they are creating active ingredients, including oily compounds like terpenes and phenolic compounds, which we know of as the very medicinal compounds in plants. So we can look at the plant kingdom as kind of a leader in this. And I think it's another great reason to stay in the plant kingdom for a really long time, and really max it out and learn from the plants in order to prepare yourself for this more risky territory of the metals. So I've seen a lot of, it's an amazing truth and many people are sharing it, but I'm also seeing a lot of misunderstanding in it. You know, I'm seeing a lot of this idea that these metallic oils are synonymous with the essential oils of plants, that through these metallic paths like the acetate path or the wet path of philosophical dissolution, that they are creating terpenes that are bioidentical to plants. I'm open to that being a reality in the sense that we know essentially that plants do that. I have never ever seen a person's lab results in front of my eyes in a published book or published online or anything. I've never ever seen it, a reputable source of lab analytics that show that the acetate path or the wet path of metals or the dry path of metals is producing specifically terpenes or essential oils that are bioidentical to that which we find in plants. Again, I'm open to it. I don't claim to know everything about this, but I'm not seeing those results. And that's a very specific claim to be made. And it's really been heavily promoted in our community of alchemy and spagyrics, and it's being repeated over and over again. And although there may be some truth to it, or maybe it's a possibility to reach and we haven't reached it yet, or maybe it's completely wrong, and we're just slightly altering what's relatively true, which is the ability to create oils from solvents and metals and minerals. But maybe they're not exactly like the plants. There's many options of what these things could be, and I'm much more interested in the hard data of analytical testing to show and prove these hypotheses and these theories, rather than just perpetuating kind of slightly misunderstood versions of this. Because again, I just haven't seen that proof of such a specific claim, and I'd love to see it, because again, I know that the plants do it, but I'm not seeing that proof in the metals, as far as what people have published with analytical tests, like including Roberts. They're plant-like, and you'd see things like phenolic compounds in his oil of gold. There's a lot of other things in there too, which aren't necessarily found in plants. So there's the truth somewhere in the middle of this. It's not completely yes, completely no. But again, your question of what is in these oils, I think that is a big question for today. What is in these oils? And that's what I'd love more people to really spend some time and effort and energy on, is finding out exactly what is in these, and are they safe, and are they therapeutic?
Definitely, yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, in terms of the plants being able to uptake these compounds as well. And even aside from human consumption, we can utilize, say, the salts, for example, and other beneficial ways in our gardens. Perhaps a funny story, Brian Leto of Biotemple Hawaii, he'd given me some meteorite salts recently. So I was really excited. I put a little bit on some honey, and he's like, be careful. Those are, there's a lot of iron and nickel in that. And he was saying that what he would do is do a dilution and utilize it for, say, growing nettle or specific plants that would benefit from uptaking iron, or it would really complement that the growth of that plant in that way, because it gets uptaken into the body. So it kind of had me thinking about just salts in general, and kind of it'd be really cool to get a collection of various salts that had different compounds that different plants utilize just for someone's home gardening techniques. Then they could use those and put them in vials and allow them to deliquesce and grow those salts over time, and then use the different individual salts for different food that they're growing. So I was just wondering kind of what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a very rudimentary way, that's being done. I mean, that's the way fertilizers are mostly produced. But I think there's a step beyond that, and I think that people into alchemy and spagyrics and gardening, people like Phoenix or Brian, they're going a step beyond oftentimes, and how they introduce these things to the soil, to the food soil web, doing it in a more holistic way, which is more beneficial for the plants, and then of course more beneficial for you. Again, you're allowing the plants to do that difficult metallic work for you, and bringing it into the plants in a bioavailable or safe way as minerals for your body, or even trace elements of metals, or converting them into active compounds in the plants, like improving the medicinal qualities of plants. And I think there's some really interesting and holistic ways to make medicines essentially to feed to the soil. That was something that Rudolf Steiner did, in making alchemical preparations to include in biodynamic farming. So this is something that's been done for a long time, and it's a really interesting topic for me, unpacking this and exploring it in my own, gardening or farming, and thinking about how can, we also use these medicines just in agriculture, helping lend a hand, especially today when we have incredibly depleted soils. We need to really put back more than what we're taking. And I think that alchemical medicines have a place in doing exactly that in agriculture. It doesn't just fill the void in our human bodies, but it can fill a void in agriculture as well. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting subject.
Yeah, for sure. I was curious, do you often work with yarrow, or have you worked much with yarrow or goldenrod by any chance? I had some questions I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, they're really common where I live, and I love both those plants. So I certainly use them in my clinical herbalism practice, and just love being around them too. The goldenrod is, it's always makes me a little sad because it's usually coming towards the end of summer, and it's definitely out in abundance now, and a lot of it's actually gone past its prime. But yeah, both plants are all around me, and I love to use them both.
Yeah, so I was curious because I think it was last year I had harvested some goldenrod roots, and then I had just recently got some yarrow that I was working with, and I noticed on both the goldenrod and the yarrow, in the roots, there are some of them have none, but some of the roots there are, it's kind of like a purplish color to them, and I'm wondering if that part of the root with that purplish color contains something in particular that is medicinal or unique, because I don't see it on the whole root itself. It's just usually like a couple spots of the root, and it seems kind of like it's not very common. I don't know, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I probably don't have a lot of the answers you're looking for in that, because neither plant do I don't commonly use the roots of either of them. I usually use the aerial parts, the flowers and the leaves. But I mean, colors like that often indicate, mineral content or nutritional content. Like I always think of that when I'm grocery shopping for vegetables. It's like, okay, I'm going to need a lot of green and like a little bit of purple, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and kind of color shop to make sure I'm getting a good full spectrum of what I want, like little bits of some of the brighter colors, and that balanced color green, and that color right in the middle, you need a lot of. So it makes me think of that, and curious to know if this is indicative of something directly in the soil of the area that you're harvesting these plants from. Like, are you noticing that in the roots in more than one spot, or is it just from one place in particular, like around your home?
Well, the goldenrod was from my land, which is probably, I want to say 60 miles or so from where I got the yarrow. So pretty different biomes too. One of them's a lot more kind of more of a desert biome. The other one's more forest. But yeah, it was just something interesting that I was curious. I wonder if it contains more compounds in those particular, because it has like a life to it. Also, it's not, it's like it looks like it's a like something that contains something. I don't know.
Something good, yeah. Well, it makes me think of anthocyanins too, because anthocyanins, often appear as like red or blue or purple in plants, and they're flavonoid with strong antioxidant effects, essentially. So, I mean, that could be used in many different therapeutic ways. So quite possibly you're seeing anthocyanins just noted by the color there. Could be a mineral or a metallic thing, but that's another likelihood too, anthocyanins. So just one of the great kind of classes of antioxidants that you can find in plants.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, are there any other kind of comments or general things that you would want to kind of put out there in regards to anything in the realm of safety or anything else that you had noticed that you wanted to speak to before we kind of wrap it up?
Yeah, let me think about it. I mean, I think we covered the main thing, which again is just like really stopping and asking these questions of like, what do we know and what do we not know? Is there blind faith and blind trusting in certain sources and continuing to maybe, perpetuate things that might not be entirely true? Really checking intentions of what you're doing. Like, why are you doing it? Not rushing, take the time. Like there's nothing good to be gained from rushing into, especially the metallic kingdom of all things in life to do. Metallic alchemy is just full of a history of people poisoning themselves and poisoning other people. It's not, a thing to mess around with, I don't think. I mean, if it's yourself and you want to take responsibility for your own self, like that's up to you, of course. But when you put information out there and when you put products out there for people, you start businesses based on this, and you don't even know what you're doing yet, or you don't know what you're producing yet, or you've assumed you know what you're producing because somebody else told you, but you don't really have the proof that it's actually true. Like, these are areas where things can really go wrong. I mean, there are many examples of famous poisonings all throughout alchemical history. Like, I mean, from inappropriate ways of working to inappropriate substances to ingest, like Israel Regardie, like he fried his lungs inhaling vapors from like a top loading system. There's evidence that Charles II had mercury poisoning. There's evidence that Isaac Newton had mercury poisoning from his alchemy work. There's evidence that Mozart might have been poisoned, through his use of maybe improperly prepared antimony. Antimony itself, etymologically, there's the idea that it comes from, the root words that mean monk killer, antimonachos. So, the idea that this substance being used could actually be detrimental, perhaps. Now, there's other ideas of what antimony could also mean, to never be by yourself, like anti-monos, but that the monk killer is one of the other ideas. There's almost 2,000 years of recorded history of Chinese alchemists poisoning themselves. I was reading about it earlier today, actually, and I saw 8 recorded deaths and 2 cases of people going crazy. And that's something, I have to say, like, to me, that's a red flag that I've seen too in some people that are working heavily with these substances in modern times, is people losing themselves a little bit, losing their minds a little bit. And that's a huge, mental illness is a huge subject, more than what we can get into right now, but obviously there's many potential causes, but heavy metal poisoning can be one of them. And there's this weird feeling in me, like when I'm starting to see these patterns evolve from, seeing way people are making certain things and how quickly people are rushing into these things and how much I think incorrect information is being perpetuated. And I'm seeing in this realm, signs of people losing it a little bit, and I have to ask myself, like, are people poisoning themselves? Because for thousands of years, they have been. And I don't think there's any reason why not, why we couldn't have that same risk right now. I think we absolutely do. In fact, maybe we have more of a risk because it's such an accessible thing now in books and social media and personalities and all the rest. So, more than touching on, I could talk about 10, 12 other preparations. I don't think that's the important thing. I really just want to make examples of these things so people take a step back and ask themselves. I try to do it every single day too. And that's, I think we have a huge opportunity to further research right now. Find a good teacher that you can trust. I recommend Robert. Learn, practice, like read more than you work first. And the whole axiom, right? Like lege, ora e labora. It's like, there's a reason why they say to read 3 times before you work and pray. You need to spend the time studying and learning, researching and mastering these things before you start selling them to people. I think personally, that's my opinion, and it's for many reasons, for philosophical reasons and for safety reasons, for integrity and protection of the alchemical practice. It's been banned many times throughout history, sometimes because of poisoning. We don't want to see, this start to happen again. So I think there's a responsibility not only to oneself, but to alchemy as a whole and to the public as a whole. That's why I wanted to talk about these things tonight. So I think that's all I really need to say for this evening to wrap that up.
I'm glad you did. Yeah. Also, one more thing, funny thing. When I first tried my first Bajiric, I wasn't aware of even the proper way to use it. I consumed the entire thing straight and ended up kind of throwing up. It was, so I learned my lesson on that one, but so don't do that for anybody listening.
Well, making mistakes is incredibly important. And, maybe that's a better thing to land on too. It's just like adversity, the adversary, it's the thing that drives us forward and makes us grow, right? So it's really important to make mistakes and learn from them. But I think we have to identify them and acknowledge them before we can really learn from them, or to avoid learning from the absolute hardest way. We don't want to see people getting injured or people, even worse, people dying, or injuring the art as a whole, the reputation of it. It's had enough of that throughout history. So yeah, mistakes are really important. We all do stupid stuff. I do stupid stuff all the time, and I want to say that too. It's like I've made many, many, many mistakes in my life, and with alchemy and spagyrics, and many of these mistakes they've brought me to these things I'm saying today about this, to slow down, check your intentions, be humble, do the work, don't rush into this stuff, especially the metals, because it's gonna spank you if you do. It's just the nature of nature. That's how it works. I think that's the system, the buffer that nature keeps us in check with. So yeah, don't win any Darwin Awards with metallic alchemy. There's been enough of those throughout the ages. Plenty of them. I mentioned quite a few of them in the last few minutes. So don't add yourself to that list, because we have such amazing potential with modern science to marry this with ancient alchemy. Prove it out, because I really think there's a marriage of it. It's when the philosophy and the chemistry are congruent together. To me, that is a truly alchemical medicine and truth. I don't think that alchemy is outside of the reach of modern science. I think we have that ability. A lot of it hasn't been done yet, and that's really exciting. And we all have this opportunity to contribute to that, put energy into that. And I'd love to see much more of that than people rushing to make and sell things. I don't think that's what it should be about. I think it should be about exploration and finding of truth, and also true medicine, truly therapeutic principles and medicines, in which in this case we have to be very cautious and careful about how we do it, because it's a relatively unknown field that we're working with.
Yes, great things to look forward to as well with what we find out in coming times. So it's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. All right.
Too.
Well,
me too. I feel very good about it.
so glad that we did this. This was fantastic. And I mean, I think there's plenty that people would appreciate and glean from this. So thank you, Daniel. And what would you like? Where would you like to direct people for if they want to find you or get a hold of you or learn more about your work?
For now, I mean, my personal Instagram, alchemia.arcadia, is a great place, and secret-fire.com, although I'm just about to redo my website. So the Instagram is probably the best place to reach me for now, and you'll find my contact on you can message me there, or to connect with me there, or my email on the website.
All right. Until next time, appreciate you.
Thank you so much again, Sky.